I'm going to cover sickle cell disease and cystic fibrosis funding issues. I know from personal experience that both of these diseases are very costly, not because I have it in my family, but because I was genetically tested for it and it was not covered by insurance. And I feel like there's a lot of work that's got to be done in how genetic testing is done so it's actually effective. And I just want to cover something I found in a scholarly article that talks about this disparities between sickle cell disease and cystic fibrosis, and I'd like to bring it up. So the treatment is quite expensive, as you can imagine, and nobody wants to have children born with these diseases and watch them suffer. So sickle cell disease is most commonly occurring in this HBB gene here. It is the most common area it happens, but then also it can happen in the HbA gene, or this is more commonly thalassemia, which is still a blood disorder related to sickle cell disease. So these right here come up to about $2,000 just to know if you have it, and this is only from one partner, so only from my wife. And then cystic fibrosis is tested here in this one, and this is the heftiest cost to it. It is $2,200 roughly, and just to see if you have the allele for it. So another article that I found that got me looking into sickle cell disease was this consensus report, and basically you can read through this, but sickle cell disease gets less support than compared to other genetic disorders that have the same inheritance patterns like cystic fibrosis. And I think that a lot of this could be genetically tested early. So these genetic disorders could all have testing done well in advance so people know before they have kids, and then preventing it would be the best measure. But then when people do have it, the treatment is very costly. And it's believed that there is a component of racism in it, which we'll get to since sickle cell disease affects mostly African Americans or other minorities, whereas cystic fibrosis affects mostly white people. Both sickle cell disease and cystic fibrosis are severe autosomal recessive disorders, and it requires two mutated alleles to even occur in someone. So right here we can see that we have one carrier and one wild type and one carrier. So there is absolutely no way their child can be born with a disease. They can carry the trait, and in certain instances there could be problems, but they will not have the full-blown disease. Now, whenever we get down here and we have one person with it mutated and one person with it also mutated, then both of those mutated alleles could get passed to their offspring, and that would cause them to have sickle cell disease or cystic fibrosis. And both of these mutations are pleiotrophies, and they cause painful episodes, organ damage, and early death. And you can see that there's very simple genetic issues here that can be identified, but just due to these very small changes, we have full-blown diseases occurring from it. The article I found very helpful was this comparison, and it mostly points out how sickle cell disease has a larger impact on more people, and it would require more medical attention, help, and funding than cystic fibrosis, but that's just not the case. This table is from the article we just looked at, and in this column we have all sickle cell disease data, and on the right we have all cystic fibrosis. So the first thing that stands out is you have 3 times as many sickle cell disease patients, and this number is also increased since this report came out in 2018. As we can see, the Black community is mostly affected by sickle cell disease, whereas nearly no white people are affected, versus over here in cystic fibrosis, it's a little more even. And then also the cost of patients. So if you do have this disease, the estimated cost that someone's going to spend over a lifetime is $460,000 versus $300,000, which is quite a bit to pay, and then also suffer with a debilitating disease. And then down here, we can see the funding. The main trend that I see is that there is more funding allocated over here to this right column. And with more money like that coming in, that should be able to help offer multiple advantages or treatments. And some of those would be the amount of drugs available. I know the main one for sickle cell disease is hydroxyurea, and then there's some more that have came out, but from what I've seen, they're quite expensive and not very feasible for someone that has the disease to afford treatment that's way out of their price range. And cystic fibrosis, since it is well funded or more funded, it does make sense that they would have more approvals. So worldwide, there's 300,000 children that are born with sickle cell disease and more than 100 million people living with the trait. And as long as people continue to live with the trait and not know it, and then they find someone and decide to have kids with them, they could potentially be with someone who has sickle cell trait and they would continue to pass that on. And this is the same with cystic fibrosis. So I think one of the best ways to prevent further disease and further problems is to educate people on their genetics. If people can take affordable genetic testing and get a clear idea of what predispositions they might give to their child, they can make different choices about how they have kids. And I think that would prevent a lot of suffering. And then also, whenever kids are born with this, because not everyone will be genetically tested, and then some people will go against the odds to have kids anyways, whenever they do have this, it's best to identify it early or know the risk going in and be prepared with certain medication or antibiotics in the case of sickle cell disease to give the kid a healthy early start so they're not having this problem cause issues way down the road. And this covers everything I've got up to so far. Table 2, this covers year by year how it changes, but I'm not sure if that's going to be significant. I'm thinking the direction I might go next is covering Dr. Weathers and how she started doing genetic testing to prevent the spread of people having children with the disease versus being tested and knowing what the options are. And maybe adoption would be a way to have a kid that they can raise and not have to deal with raising a child that has to suffer from sickle cell disease.